Hi, this is Father Mark Boulos, and this is not the Bible is Literature podcast. This is something new. All of us, like Job, go about in darkness, qoder, without comfort. We stand in the assembly and cry for help. This is exactly what I did under the cloud of darkness, qoder, the darkness in which God found me. I made a call, as I do each week in the assembly. You must do the work in that state in which you have been found, because there is work to be done. This is your fate, Habibi. Qof-Dalet-Resh. That is the Semitic function, and it's the same function in Arabic. The expression, laylat al-qadr, refers to the command of God given to his prophet at night in the night of his decree, the night of his power. John Pearson was indeed attentive that night, and the result is the Slow Bible Study podcast. As fate challenges each of us, John challenges American individualism, urging his hearers to submit to Scripture as it was originally intended, through its ancient languages in its historical setting. By stripping away interpretations and theologies, John emphasizes the Bible's clear, uncompromising call to bow down before the Lord. His podcast confronts the pervasive egoism of American culture, encouraging us to hear and obey Scripture as God's command in the assembly, rather than our personal interpretations, reminding us that the Bible is a call to submission, not a prop for our self-justification. In my distress, I cried to the Lord, and he answered me. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. I give you the premiere episode of the Slow Bible Study podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Slow Bible Study. My name is John. The purpose of this podcast is to try and hear Scripture with ancient ears, putting aside our various theologies and traditions in order to learn from the text through its original language and culture. I will be doing relatively short episodes, reading through the Bible at a snail's pace, highlighting words and their ancient understanding, in the hopes of reformatting my abstract Western mind to the concrete command embedded in the scriptural teaching. This will not be easy. It will be hard to hear and will not agree with us. But in order to be honest with the text, we must do our best to hear it on its terms, not on ours. I will try and keep my opinions and traditions out of the way in order to submit to Scripture. As my schedule allows, I aim to read through both the Old and New Testament simultaneously, alternating between the two every other episode, to better understand the total story as it is written. I am not a biblical scholar. I have had no formal training in the scriptural text, and although I am studying the original languages, I cannot speak them. But we shouldn't need a degree or be a published theologian in order to hear Scripture the way the author intended. We must do a little more work than we are used to, and not solely rely on our English Bibles or modern interpretations. We must strive to hear the biblical text with ancient Semitic ears. With that being said, I will be putting quite a bit of emphasis on the original languages. Over the past 7 years or so, I've wanted to understand Scripture in the way that the first hearers did, and the more I have delved into the ancient cultures and languages of the Bible, I've come to the conclusion that just hearing it in English falls extremely flat, and in most cases does not convey the heaviness of Scripture in its original form. Our theologies, as well-intentioned as they might be, are man-made, and in some cases very confusing. They tend to act as a filter we put over the text of the Bible in order to self-justify our various traditions. We don't need theology to hear Scripture correctly. The original hearers didn't, so neither should we. We need to do the harder thing and go back to the source, because at the end of the day, the Bible is not a proof text. It is a word of command, from its opening verse to the last one. So there are a few things I want to keep in mind as I go through the text. Number 1, the Bible was not written in English. I want to say that again. The Bible was not written in English. The Old Testament was written in Biblical Hebrew, with some parts in Aramaic, both being ancient Semitic languages that are concrete and not abstract in function. The New Testament was written from the same Semitic understanding of the world, but in the Koine Greek of the first century, as it was the common language between the cultures of the Roman Empire. The two main biblical languages, Hebrew and Greek, do not operate like English, and the way the biblical authors communicated in their respective writings is not the way we communicate in the modern West. Number 2, there are no chapters, verses, or subheadings in the original text, not to mention no punctuation or vowels. Our chapters and breaking up stories is not always the way the authors intended it. The dividing markers in the original differ from our understanding and actually play a role in how the congregation was instructed to hear the text. It was meant to be read in its totality, so that you hear the flow of the story, the repetitions, the connections between words, and ultimately, the judgment and accountability it holds all its hearers to. Number 3, Scripture was not written to be read privately. I know this sounds odd to us modern people, but it was originally written to be read aloud to the assembly from the scroll. I'm not saying that we shouldn't read it privately. Of course, we naturally do this, but we must always keep in mind how it was intended to be heard. We cannot make up our own rules or individualize it. The scroll played an important part in how the text was communicated. They wouldn't hop, skip, and jump around the Bible like we do, connecting dots that the authors never intended. They had to read it as it stands, the scroll controlling the flow of the story, so to speak. Number 4, the Bible was not written to us, and was not written for us in the way that we might think. It was written for humanity to submit to on its terms, to obey it. Scripture is the reference, not us. I know we don't want to hear that, because as Americans we are taught to follow our dreams and be super individuals, but we are not the intended audience of the Bible. The biblical authors, both Old and New Testament, did not have us in mind when they wrote it. Keeping this in our heads as we read will help to put us underneath Scripture's authority, which is where we belong. And number 5, the cultures of the ancient Near East do not reflect ours at all. They did not live in the same way or understand the world around them like we do. Their relationship to family, marriage, work, money, love, and law and order is night and day different from us. We are very far removed from the biblical story. So understanding the way the earliest addressees heard the text and its grammar is extremely important if we want to understand the Bible and its teaching correctly. We have to understand that the Bible is not ours. It is God's, and we have to be very careful about how we use it. The scriptural text was written long before us and will be here long after we are gone. Ultimately, we must turn to the scriptural words and do what we are told, not what we want to, and most definitely not what we feel in our hearts. Thank you for listening. We will begin our reading of Scripture in the next episode.